how do you know if someone's intelligent, Joel?
I'm gonna like steal someone else's wisdom, but I'm gonna give them credit, obviously. And that's Naval Ravikant when he said, "A true measure of intelligence is are you getting what you want out of life." So I'm not looking at it like evaluating somebody on like their IQ or how their grades were in school or how much money they make and anything like that.
Mm.
I mean, they are trivial measures of intelligence. They tell you something. They tell you the degree that that person can absorb and regurgitate information in a high pressure situation, and they tell you, you know, how blessed you are, maybe genetically, to solve problems and things like that, and have sort of verbal and non-verbal reasoning skills. Okay, that there's something to those metrics, but that's not intelligence. I think Naval sums it up very well in that idea that the intelligent person is the one who gets what they want out of life. They do the things they want to do. They find ways to do things they want to do, to overcome the natural like obstacles and constraints of human life, and they find happiness and they find love. And that's the best way to think about it, because knowledge without using it to live a good life is like futile. What's the point in that? That's just like intellectual masturbation. Like there's no end product. So yeah.
So it's all kind of this application. I think I think that is a very good definition. I know Hormozy defines it as like the rate of learning, how fast you can pick something up and then apply it. Um, and I think about the smartest people that I know, or the people that we've interviewed on the podcast that are pretty intelligent. Someone like Nick Kazmic, that guy he's applying shit. He is applying shit in his life. And yeah, I guess the smartest people I do know, they don't hoard the information in their head, because what I think happens is I think our brain there's only a certain amount that we have like a capacity, right? And so we have to be selective with what we let in and what we forget. Because over time we just naturally forget things that we don't use. So if you're just hoarding stuff and you're not applying it,
Right.
then you just forget it. There's sort of like a natural curve, and I think so. I think some of it is intelligent people are selective with what they choose to consume, what they choose to absorb, and it's almost like yeah, you have to. If you're not gonna apply that thing, um, I guess is it worth that being the focus? It's like when we do prep for the pod, we always try and get points that we're able to apply into our daily life. And that's kind of like one of the filters of what we choose to what we choose to talk about. So I think you're right with that Naval quote.
Well, if you think about even the way that learning is, like the way that learning works optimally, is it's about reproducing the idea or the action. So
Mm,
like I thought I used this a lot when I was in like school and studying for my A levels and stuff. You don't learn stuff by more input and more input. It's once the input is there, once you've had the lesson or you've seen the slideshow or you've read the chapter of the textbook, then the way you consolidate and solidify that learning is by acting it out or reproducing it in the written word or answering questions about it or drawing that information out of yourself. So maybe we can also add that is another piece of evidence for this intelligence equals application theory that we're just developing. That Nick Kazmic, for example, learns something that Socrates said, but then tries to act out the lesson of that in his day that day, and it solidifies that learning. And
mm,
then it's allowing him to more easily get what he wants out of life by improving his character or his circumstances or his the way he navigates that day. He's drawing more joy or more like more contentment, or he's a better person to the people around him. It's the gap between learning the thing and it making his life better is shorter because of the application. And that's kind of then goes back to Hormozy in that ability to like learn something and change your behavior as quick as possible. Like that relationship, that feedback loop is shorter.
Yeah. The other one by Naval is if you're so intelligent, why aren't you happy?
Really good question. It's a really good question.
um, because I think there's actually a decent correlation between intelligence and mental health.
Mm.
In that the more you know, the kind of more likely you are to be depressed. Maybe I think some of it is that like you actually know how hard things are, and you don't have the ignorance is bliss anymore. And there's this kind of like high performance anxiety probably that I think a lot of intelligent guys have, where maybe they work a lot, so they feel guilty when they're not constantly doing shit. They feel constantly behind. They're hoarding themselves with coffee, and they don't sort of slow down. So I think I actually saw this thing that was like you shouldn't go to therapy if you have a higher IQ than your therapist, because when they're telling you, like, you already are intelligent enough to find the solutions yourself, so you don't actually need that. But I think there is criticisms about that, so I'd kind of like to get your thoughts on the whole kind of like mental health and intelligence correlation.
Well, I don't agree with that statement about therapy because therapy isn't, for me anyway. It's it's not really a place where you learn stuff. Like the therapist is smarter than you, and they're like, it's not like a relationship you might have with a great lecturer where they have the knowledge and they spend time with you and try to transfer that knowledge onto you. Therapy is a relationship with another person where you learn about yourself, and it's an unfiltered place where you can speak about your circumstances and your feelings. So, um, yeah. Anyway, let's package that point
Yeah.
for a second. On the relationship between intelligence and mental health, I'd love to know the data. Um, if anyone wants to send us a link to a paper or anything, maybe I'll do a bit of research on it myself. But I definitely know that like self awareness is is in a lot of ways a curse unless you can like work on yourself to turn it into uh you know a greater relationship with yourself. But just a big load of self-awareness, if you're somebody that's high in it but you don't know what to do about it, it can be really troubling because you do feel things really deeply. I think there is something to that, there's a certain personality makeup of person. I don't know whether it's high neuroticism with high conscientiousness at the same time, and maybe there's a little bit of I don't know, openness to experience in that element to it, but it just makes them, they feel things deeply, but they struggle to like rationalize it and do something about it, and it just things can get very overwhelming at that point. I think there's something to that, but that's not necessarily intelligence per se. That's self awareness. What do you think?
I think that um intelligent people are often misunderstood, and I think most intelligent people are a little bit like more depressed, because truth truth is often painful, and they know more truth. So
I definitely would say that probably intelligence increases the probability of cynicism.
yeah,
Um, and like, yeah, the feeling that everything's a bit catastrophic and dark. I can see that coming through, that essence, which just makes things a little bit more depressing. But I'd love to know the data on this, whether there are correlations. Um,
do you
yeah,
think do you think you actually know who the most intelligent people are, or do you think they like kind of hide it, and they kind of they might look actually potentially the most intelligent person looks stupid sometimes, in that they ask the obvious questions, and um they actually like they kind of hide it, like they don't actually want to reveal it, because like if you are intelligent among a lot of people that are a bit like that are sort of less intelligent, then you don't want to be that one guy that's like that just pulls out and speaks like very perfect English and is very eloquent and tells something that actually it's this way, and then everyone else in the room is just kind of like, oh, okay, oh, okay, and then they carry on and they don't really acknowledge it. Like he doesn't fit in. So I think the intelligent man, he almost doesn't show what he really knows.
Okay, that's an interesting point. There's a few ways to think about that. So if we're going through Naval's frame, would certainly be able to pinpoint people where, to me, from my outside perspective, it seems like they are getting more of what they want out of life, and that's quite clear in terms of people's just general well-being and like their life circumstances, and are they doing something that's meaningful for them? Um, and then on if we're looking at the trivial measures of intelligence, the academic world and grades and book knowledge and things like that. Um, yeah, maybe when you reach a high enough level of that, you then no longer feel the need to tell people about it. I mean,
Mhm.
even as you were talking, I think it's a call to humility for us to look at ourselves and go, why do we feel the need to talk about this stuff all the time? Are we less secure in our intelligence than a wiser man 20 years older than us that doesn't feel the need to explore ideas all the time and share them with people? Are we signaling that we don't know what's going on? Maybe we say that. I mean, I feel that's true to a great degree. Do you know what I mean? In the same way that like someone who is constantly trying to convince somebody they're intelligent, there's something to that where you can kind of see through it a little bit. Whereas the
Mhm.
more humble person that may sit on a bunch of knowledge and a bunch of wisdom doesn't feel the need to shove it in people's faces. So
Mm.
if we look through Naval's frame, I think that's the best. That's definitely the best way to think about this question.
And in Naval's frame, like the person that is getting more out of life, sometimes they don't want to show it to people that are not getting as much out of life. So really, like, I think there is a lot of people, but there is also their type that like is on social media and shows that they're getting more out of life.
Yeah,
And that's the actual person probably that's faking it
it's true.
because
It's true. Because if you're getting what you want out of life, then would you really feel the need to convince other people that that's the case, or would you just be living your life and enjoying yourself?
mm, I think we can kind of close this with the obvious one is like Socrates' idea that the smart he was so smart because he knew what he knew how much he didn't know type thing.
Yeah.
The more he knows, the less he doesn't the less he knows. So it's kind of like the more you get out of life, the more that you know you could get out of life.
Mm. The more
uh,
potential for quality of life exists. And that's a good motivator. How happy can you be? How content can you be? How much love can you experience? How much joy can you bring to others? That's a good, worthy adventure.
yeah, it's endless. Joel, tell me about the Master Oogway archetype.
Oh, I thought you were going to go into my point that I had on the document, but not this. Okay, so did this come from a phone call we had? Or did this come from a previous episode where I mentioned it?
This was post podcast, but we didn't record it.
Okay. Uh, I can see what you're doing here because it's a very clippable point, but there also is some value in it. So, um, growing up, I was born in the early 2000s or the mid 2000s, really. Um, Kung Fu Panda is a massive film franchise from my childhood. I mean, especially the second one. I don't know when that came out. I want to say I was like 10 or 9, somewhere around there. And I've watched those films back recently because like me and my girlfriend were just like, yeah, let's just do a Kung Fu Panda like time. I mean, she'd never seen some of them all the way through, I think. So anyway, my favorite character in this franchise is Master Oogway, who's like this tortoise, and he is like the master of the kung fu hierarchy, right? Especially in the first film, that's when he sort of is most relevant. But then he pops up here and there in the next few films because he's such a loved character, and he's been memed and et cetera, and that's why he's people would know him. Um, but I like him because he's old and he's a tortoise, but yet he's the most powerful and respected figure. Like he doesn't necessarily have, he's not got loads of big muscles, and he's not doing load of somersaults and backflips. to make himself seem like he's a great kung fu master. He just kind of knocks about with his staff and talks about wisdom and spirituality and inner peace. But everybody knows that he has the capacity to be great in combat because he's had an illustrious career of doing that. He's like transcended the need to convince people that he's powerful. And also there's, this is going to sound so funny, but it does make sense to me that he is in Carl Jung's Afternoon of Life. He has ticked off all the boxes in the material world, and now he's in the phase of his life where he's focusing on his spirituality and his internal world. And it's funny, as I'm saying this, I can already think about the ways that people may think this is silly, but it makes sense to me. He represents transcendence from the mundane through spirituality, and also like this completed the game of life, like mastery type archetype, that he's mastered kung fu to such a degree that he is so at peace in himself. Like there's harmony between himself and the world, and he's such a fountain of wisdom for people. So maybe that's something, at the end of the road of mastery is great wisdom, great peace, and the ability to inspire others to such a beautiful degree. So
Do you think he's like a wise king archetype?
Yeah, a
Because
little bit of that. Yeah. What else? What other ways would I consider it? Wise king, mentor character, like spiritual
father?
guide, very fatherly, spiritual father. Yeah.
Is there any like key scenes that you can think about that are quite impactful for you? Because I'm thinking about two things. One, when he sort of passes away under that like blossom tree,
Amazing.
and he talks to Poe, and he gives him some last kind of advice about like this. I think it was about the scroll, that scroll that eventually is Poe's reflection, about being like the kind of chosen one. And that's it's just impactful how he goes away with like the blossom tree slowly and fades away. And the second one is where he kind of like he has that thing where he'd like the bad character, that bad like sort of lion thing, where he like dials on his stomach and like kills him just through like, I don't know, he almost kills him with kind of spirituality. So yeah.
Like those scenes of him under the blossom tree. I mean, it's so cool, isn't it, that you can watch back children's stories, children's films that are advertised as being for children, and they have such like raw wisdom underneath them that as a young adult I can still learn a lot from. But he says a lot of things like that no choice is necessarily good or bad. Like it's when Poe's reflecting on like how out of place he feels in the monastery and why he's been chosen, and he feels so stupid and different from everybody else, and he wants to quit. And Ugo's like, quit, don't do this, do this. I mean, it's your part of your destiny is to be here. What will be type. I mean, it's like kind of cliche spiritual advice, I guess. And another one I think about is when he's trying to convince this other like master guy that he should put some faith in the panda, even though he seems a bit silly, and that he needs to be nurtured, and he's like a peach like seed for a peach tree. And Uguay's like, you may wish for this to be, an apple tree or something, some other tree, some other fruit, but you can shout at it and be angry with this seed as much as you want, but it will always just become a peach tree. Like, it's not going to be anything else. All you can do is nurture it and water it, and put it and plant it in the right place and give it the right soil so that it becomes what it needs to become. It follows its destiny to be a peach tree, and you cannot wish it to be anything else but a peach tree. There's that kind of stuff. And then, the way he fights in the movies, because he's just old and a bit sort of physically weak, is he'll just do some mad like Tai Chi moves on somebody's belly, and they just I don't know, it's just he's crazy. But and I know it sounds funny because I can hear myself. I get what people say when it's like, bro, it's not that deep, and this sounds stupid. But the reason an archetype is valuable is because it comes up everywhere. It will even come up in children's TV and children's films. And as a kid, you know that Master Oogway is wise. You know from the off. And how do you know? It's because he has archetypal characteristics. So, yeah.
Mhm. And I think the reason that Master Uguay is a tortoise is pretty fascinating because he is that same kind of like tortoise in the hare. The tortoise takes his time. He's very old. He's lived for a couple hundred years, and he's gathered in all his wisdom. And now he's just kind of like living quite simply, and he's like he has no like desire or like willing to understand the world. He already is at that like master place,
Oh,
and I think he's a masculine role model
hugely.
that that we should all try and get to, like
Mm.
for our kind of like late life, like because he's that he even though he's not the main character, he's almost the character that stands out the most in that film.
Mm.
Um, People always remember him because although that pattern has been sort of done across, I don't know, for example, The Lion King, there's that kind of like mad monkey type guy
Yeah,
who's like
Rafiki. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of, I would say there's a lot of overlap between Rafiki and Oogway. Yeah.
but Rafiki's a bit kind of more mental than Uguay. Rafiki's
Rafiki's like
almost
an unrefined Oogway, you know? You meet Rafiki maybe in their midlife, whereas Oogway's in the end of his life, you know?
yeah. Rafiki's still doing like psychedelics on the basis, and
Yeah,
so he's a
exactly, yeah.
like he's a
Rafiki's
bit
still
more
getting off her head in the tree and yeah.
whereas
Whereas
Uguay's
Oogway's past all that, you know? Oogway will just sort of read scripture and meditate and be happy.
But yeah, I am I bring this up because I hoped that there maybe be a way when I saw your point about how angels fly that they take themselves lightly, I thought there might be a little crossover there.
Well, I can come to that at the end because, you know, that's a point about humility. And I guess that's something that he possesses as a character. That he has had such an amazing career and is so wise and so powerful, but yet he keeps that power sheathed until until the extreme moments where it's required. And he has the capacity to commit such violence but chooses not to. There's something to that. So yeah, shall I dive into my point?
Yeah.
We'll see if it kind of sort of circles back. So yeah, today I want to talk about uncertainty, which is it does build a little bit on things we discussed last week and weeks previously, and it brings in a couple of ideas. And I think this would be a good kind of point for you to jump in and dress up a couple points of your own in it as well. And I think it's because of like the transitionary point I'm at in life, that we're both at in life, that probably many of our listeners are at in life, graduating from university, that abyss that exists at the end of that, of not knowing what to do or where to go, and trying to make the right decision. And what comes with that is a big old load of uncertainty, and it's uncomfortable, and it's anxiety provoking. But I guess what I want to bring today is two ways that we can tackle uncertainty, and alchemize it into excitement and enthusiasm. So the first one comes from John Keats, who was a romantic poet back in the early 1800s. And he had this term that he coined negative capability. I think I might have discussed it before in previous episodes. I'm not 100% sure. But negative capability for him in his context of poetry was the ability for a poet to allow and accept uncertainty and chaos and the unknown in creativity, and in their emotions and in their experience of life. And the open-mindedness to allow chaos and uncertainty to be what it is without trying to search for answers and for reason and for logic and to make it understandable, to let the mystery be the mystery, to let the awe-provoking thing evoke awe and not try and break it down, and understand it, but yeah, just allow the chaos to be what it is. And when you do that, I think, or when you apply that to your uncertainty in your life, it allows you to stay light and stay free and not be bogged down by the unknown, and see it as actually a source of adventure and excitement. I think this is, so we discussed with guy called Jack from an account called The Jaunt on Instagram and TikTok. We talked about like the trying to fend off like the natural hardening of your 20s. He talked about people he knew that as their 20s had gone on, they'd bought into the system of the material world more. They'd sacrificed what makes them naturally happy and joyful for, a corporate job, or that the responsibilities have crushed the light that was in them when they were a kid or a teenager, things like that. I think a key part of not hardening is allowing chaos to be chaos. Like, and seeing and accepting that for a time in your life, that's going to be the case. Because I think when you pick a path that may look stable but not happy and it doesn't enrich your soul, you may be doing that because you're so like obsessed with quelling that uncertainty and having a clear path for yourself for the future. But in doing that, you like entrap yourself in it. Do you get what I mean? And so this lightness that negative capability gives you, like not needing things to be certain, is really powerful. And I think before I go on to my second bit, I'll pause there and see if you have anything to add.
Yeah. So what I'd add to that is we're acknowledging uncertainty as a good thing. We're acknowledging chaos as a good thing, and we are seeing it as the kind of the path. We're seeing uncertainty as the path, as instead of kind of like a problem that we should shy away from. It reminded me a lot, and I can put an example in this about David Hume's Missing Shade of Blue, what I spoke about a lot of episodes ago, about how his theory was that if you lined up all the different shades of blue and there was one missing, would your brain be able to fill it in? And he didn't really have an answer of whether it could or whether it couldn't. But essentially, that theory meant to me was that that theory symbolizes when you have uncertainty, when you have a missing shade in your life, what can you fill it in? And to me, I think you can't with what you spoke about with John Keats. I think you can't have too much uncertainty that is overwhelming. That you can't have too many missing shades of blue. But if there's just like a little bit, then you can use the other different shades to kind of fill it in, and it can kind of just like you can use the other different shades to kind of guess what that uncertainty is going to look like and kind of continue to move through it. It's like in my case, my missing shade of blue right now is the uncertainty of whether I can take my business full time in sort of like a year. And I have like a lot of the shades that are kind of next to it, that I can kind of be okay with continuing on that path and just telling myself I'm going to be able to fill that in eventually. But if it was that like my shade was that like I need to go from 1 to 100 and I need to learn how to play piano in front of 100 people by next week, then that shade is too big that I can't fill it in. So I think one thing that I would add is that there is a right amount of uncertainty that we need. But I like the whole idea that is kind of our path. That's the main thing I got from your point, is that the uncertainty paves a path for us to continue to go down.
Yeah.
So yeah, carry on.
So I just want to add one point about the value of chaos and uncertainty that I actually thought of like just impromptu in the moment yesterday. But there's something about the energy of chaos that gives us life and gives us it's the source of growth and of wisdom, is that chaotic energy, that chaotic potential, and that stability and the lack of chaos and the lack of uncertainty is dead. Like stability, where you know what's going to happen, is you've killed something. And the way I would put it is like if I was like with you in a room and I put a stone on a table, right? I'm certain that the stone isn't going to do anything on the table because the stone is dead, right? There's no uncertainty or chaos about what it might do. But if I brought a puppy into that room and put it on the table, it would be chaotic because the thing is alive. But that would be a joyful experience to engage with the chaotic, uncertain energy that gave that thing life. Do you kind of get what I
Mm,
mean by that? Like, there's something in the if you get rid of the chaos and uncertainty, you kill it.
mm,
It's stable, but it's dead. Um, and so that's kind of another frame of thinking, is to like, you want this uncertainty to have the adventure of your life. You want to live, man. And without the chaos, you can't live. In a kind of comes back to, a lot of people exist, but not many people remain alive for too long because they just sell their soul to a job they hate or whatever. Like, they choose stability over aliveness, over vitality. So anyway, that was just one thing I wanted to add. The
mm,
second point I kind of had was a call back to humility, which I think is like the golden character trait. Anyway, that's a theme that's been running through my thinking over the last 6 months. Because humility, when you have humility, you take yourself lightly, and humility allows you to engage in the chaos with this kind of fun, enthusiastic, playful, full archetype like mentality. And I actually think, you can turn uncertainty into fun if you do that. If you don't take yourself too seriously, then you are much more likely to step into that excitement. Um, and it's kind of like what we talked about last week when we questioned, can you plan your life like the West but experience it like the East? Like, can you do serious things unseriously? Can you engage in the
mm,
game of life in an unserious manner? Um, and I think that, alongside this negative capability, so like the ability to allow uncertainty and then to not take yourself too seriously as you try to navigate it, that can lead you to a pretty joyful adventure. And I just added that this to this humility point, a bit of G.K. Chesterton, where he said, I'm paraphrasing the first bit, where he said something like, the essence of heaven is fundamentally unserious, um,
mhm.
and that the angels fly because they take themselves lightly, that they are relieved of the heavy weight of ego and self-consciousness, and that's why they are angelic, is because they don't take themselves seriously. Um, so yeah, I'll pause there.
When you're talking about the dog and the rock analogy, I like it. It's to me that sums up this the Nietzsche quote of like how chaos gives birth to a dancing star. I think is that the quote? Yeah,
Yeah,
something
something
like
along
that.
those lines.
Um, I like it. I think that's really good. And the humility point. Yes, I think I do love that quote that the angels fly because the angels fly because they take themselves lightly. When it actually brings back what we were saying with Jack about how the solution about that is like, can you do it consciously, or do you have to like have life hit you to be humble? And I did some thinking on this after that podcast, and I was like, you can consciously be humble, but it's not as like impactful as other solution to be humbled. Like, I don't think there's going to be anything like uh, um being humbled. I don't think like consciously that would um that would have the same big impact. Um but I think you can still, to a degree, be consciously humble, and I think some of that would be adopting like a faith system,
Mm.
something bigger than you, right? Um and and yeah, because it's not going to be action. It's not going to be like straight proof from the world that you're not the ego that you think you are. I don't think it's going to beat it, but I think you can still do it. So
Well, that's what literally. That's why I'm glad you brought up the faith thing, because as you were talking, I was thinking, well, that's what a spiritual practice is largely about. Is like a daily ritual of a reminder of who you really are, and that you're not your ego. You're the awareness underneath it all. That's what meditation, to a large degree, is. Um, and you might have the crazy spiritual revelation or the psychedelic trip that kills your ego and reveals it for what it is, but you can't do that every day. You have to have the small dose every day, uh, but it's not as impactful. I agree. Maybe consciously humbling yourself is a daily practice, whereas when life humbles you, the Lord does it in one big hit. uh, in one big
Mm,
dose.
yeah. Um, should we pivot to one last point?
Yeah, go on then.
Okay, cool. Um, I want to be decently a little bit careful about how I word this point, but essentially, I was I was having a good conversation about like child psychology and like kind of Pavlovian conditioning and sort of things along those lines about how we can kind of influence behavior as people that are going to grow up in 5 to 10 years and have children. Um, and I used the example because I was talking with this Nigerian girl and she was telling me about how in African culture it's normalized to hit your kids.
Right.
And I found that quite interesting in that my my response was that like that's kind of bad. I feel like it's an almost I feel like it's a bad way to solve a problem. I think like you can communicate the same message to your child, but in way healthier ways. But her African heritage normalizes it, and her argument was that it's a kind of call to discipline, that the discipline then creates the respect. It's kind of like if you touch a stove and you get burnt, you don't touch the stove again. You don't misbehave once you get hit as a child. And then she backed it up with this little Bible verse that basically refers to how it refers to like a rod and how like the rod is something that saves them in terms of like the rod symbolizing like punishment and how that actually helps people. So I found it quite interesting about like how there is something to her argument in that maybe sometimes raising your voice, if we're not going down that much extreme of we don't have to go down the extreme of hitting your kids, but the concept of raising your voice, the emotional tone is enough to prevent behavior. So um, I guess I'm kind of directing to how motivation works, how how we can how we can influence sort of um, children behavior and how we can both kind of like we can motivate them with fear. Like it is something that works, but I'm wondering how much it works. So I'd like to know what you kind of know about child psychology and if and your thoughts on this before I continue.
Yeah, I mean it's controversial to a degree, and it's complex, and it's nuanced. I mean, there are many other ways to discipline, obviously, but having a sense of discipline and authority is important. But what I was writing here while you were talking was, yes, you have to be an authority to your children, but you can't be a monster to them. And that world is a slippery slope, because if you decide to, hit them for one reason, does the bar to that punishment drop lower and lower? Do you know what I mean? Like, is there some? How do you know that you're disciplined enough as a parent to know when it's right to bring that like precaution out? Like, it would just not be something I would ever go down, because it's so messy and like risky, and like there
Mm.
are there are other ways to discipline. There are other punishments, to use a sort of precarious word, that one can do. I mean, for me as a kid, if I really stepped out of line, I mean, I was a good kid anyway, generally, but um, if I stepped out of line, we had a thing called Sweetie Saturday, where I could go to the shop and spend £1.50 on sweets or something. If I was naughty in the week, then Sweetie Saturday would be taken away. And that was enough of a, of a deterrence to not step out of line. But, I don't know, man, it's complicated. But that's what I'd say, you have to be an authority, but you can't be a monster. You want respect from your children, but if your children are scared of you, not good. Not good.
Mm. Yeah. I think the best way to do is to get the child itself to think that that behavior is wrong. So let's take say your 3-year-old bit another kid in nursery.
Mm.
If I think the best way to go about that is to get your child to feel inside that the guilt of that action, and you
Mm.
somehow have to get that across, that like the that would be the best case scenario, solving that, in that, like, putting them on the naughty step to reflect about why biting children is wrong is maybe more ideal. The other thing that I thought
Do
about,
you have that capacity at 3? I don't know. Like, what I've written here is development of superego. That's important. The conscience, 100%. But at
mm,
3, are you still, like, too much, like, reward and punishment thinking, you know?
that's the problem, I suppose, because maybe at a young age, children can't rationalize it, and therefore they need that kind of like instinct that, okay, if I bite Henry again, I'm gonna get slapped.
Yeah.
So biting Henry equals bad.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think, yeah, it is a kind of like complex issue, but I also feel like the kind of being a bit like using fear, I think, is actually only short term as well. But I think that would be the disadvantage, in that, like, sort of being shouted at, it works in the short term, but that might not actually prevent the behavior. So if that, like, if there was a 9-year-old that was to hit another child, in school, that if, like, he used fear, that would work for a couple weeks and he wouldn't go around hitting. But then after that fear kind of like went away, it kind of drifted off, that he might go back to it because that behavior hasn't necessarily been hit at the core. Um, that it can, that they don't, that 9-year-old is able to rationalize it a bit. So he hasn't been showed the guilt that it is wrong. And yeah, um,
Well, the problem with punishment is that it's not always obvious or easy to make sure that the feedback that the punishment is about the behavior, it's not super easy to establish that relationship clearly. Like, sometimes punishment gets associated with being caught rather than the actual behavior itself. Or in this case, the fear may not be attached to the undesirable behavior, but instead attached to the parent. Rather than being afraid to, you know, step out of line, bite that kid again, whatever, throw your mashed potato across the room. The fear instead is associated with, if I do this, then mummy or daddy are going to do something to me. And then mummy or daddy become the source of fear, not the antisocial behavior. Does that make sense?
mm, yeah. I think the hardest part is when they're very young, because isn't there that thing where, like, if a child isn't socially educated by like 3 years old, then they're gonna never be their whole life or something,
Mm.
and that, like, a percentage of children that are like, they're the biters, they're the kickers, they do all that kind of thing in nursery, in 2 to 3, and then they're more likely to be sort of serial killers if that doesn't get fixed. So it's like a problem that, like, those early years is like the most important, and there needs to be like not any like behavioral, like, big things that are ignored. I think there's also something in that, like, there's the other side of kind of how we look at motivation, and that there's the reward in that, like, rewarding them for good behaviors, and like what your mum did of like preventing that reward for bad behaviors. That's pretty good, to be fair. I think that's a pretty nice way to do it. Um it in that they will get recognized almost for the opposite. So when they show kindness, they get rewarded. But when they show a bit more sort of aggression, then they don't get those rewards anymore. I think that's a powerful tool to use as well.
Mm. Like, I remember, this is quite a sort of weird story that's just come into my mind. But I remember being a kid, and it was one time where um, there was like it was like a flying ant season in the UK, which is like, for some reason, 1 or 2 days a year, I think, these insects called flying ants just breed, or they hatch aggressively, and then there's like thousands of them flying around. I don't know if people get what I'm saying by that. But anyway, it was 1 year, it was that, and I must have been, I don't know, 7, maybe younger. Um, and there was these 2 flying ants that had, like, been injured or something. They were just on the floor in the garden, and my mum was like, "Don't step on those." And you know when just somebody says, "Don't do something," and it makes you really wanna do it? And as a kid, you haven't really got, like, much moral reasoning, so I think I just ended up, like, pretending like I didn't mean to, but I stepped on these 2 flying ants and killed them. And then my mum was like, "Right, no sweeties on Saturday for, like, 3 weeks." Because to her, that, that idea of just harming an innocent thing for no reason, that was a big crime, which now, please, she did it, because now, ever since that point, I don't kill insects. I just don't. If there's a spider in the room, I'll grab a bit of paper and a cup and put it out the window. Even when people try and swat flies, I don't like it. So maybe that's a little bit of classical conditioning from back in the day, that, like, it was, because to me that punishment was quite harsh. Like 3 weeks of no sweetie Saturday, like that's aggressive. Um, Instilled in me the idea that you don't kill innocent beings, even if they're just insects. You know?
Mm. I can I think I have that example as well with killing a spider. I think something quite similar happened to me, if I can think about it rightly. Um, is it kind of linked to Pavlovian conditioning, where like the idea that like can we link Pavlovian conditioning to like child like
It's more
um
it's more operant conditioning, which was Skinner's theory of the reward and punishment. Classical conditioning would be, every time you went near, I don't know, the cookie jar, you got an electric shock. And so you learn to associate going near the cookie jar as pain. And so you don't go near the cookie jar. Whereas operant conditioning would be, you do something, you receive a punishment, but there's or a reward, and it'll either motivate or demotivate that behavior. Classical conditioning is like associations at the same time. The things happen in like simultaneously, whereas operant is more like you do a thing, you get a reward. You don't do a thing, you don't, you're like, you do the wrong thing, you get a punishment. Whereas classical conditioning is like these 2 things happen at the same time, so they get associated in my brain. Does that make sense?
so is there a conditioning that like takes away reward for doing bad behavior?
Yeah, I think that's called um ah I want to say um like a negative, or like a positive. There's words for it. So when we looked at operant conditioning, there's like positive punishment, which is where um a bad thing is added, and like negative punishment where a good thing is taken away. And then there's like, I want to say positive reward where you get a good thing, and then negative reward where a bad thing is taken away. So there's a
Mhm.
strand like that, but I'm not super clear on that. That's a vague memory. But
Yeah,
yeah, it's
I th-
complicated.
I think it's a good idea because generally loss is more than gain. Like if I lose £100, I that sort of emotional weight will be more than me gaining £100. So I think it's it's I think it's the best out of all the sort of solutions we talked about. The one where you lose sweets for 3 weeks is
Mhm.
best.
Mm.
Uh, I guess I tried to put these conditioning solutions in. I think it's the one with Pavlov when they get like a bell and like a dog or something like that.
Yeah.
Um,
So basically, dogs will naturally salivate when food comes, right? When a food bowl of food is put in front of them. And what Pavlov did is he combined the presence of food with the sound of a bell. Um, and then over a series of trials, by the end, the dogs would still salivate like food was coming with only hearing the bell, because they associated the bell with the food, if that makes sense.
so if I want my kid to lay the table, then I can try and associate it with food, maybe.
Uh, yeah. How would you classically condition your kid to lay the table? Or okay, maybe go, while they're laying the table, you play their favorite song,
Okay.
and so then, if for them, that when they hear that favorite song, maybe they're like, oh, it's time to lay the table, and they just get used to associating those 2 things. I don't know. Does that work? Maybe people can correct me if I'm wrong, but that makes sense in my head.
I think it's a good way to get about life of like, because we're all kind of like associations of things. Like we're all like people. People don't remember names, they don't remember specifics, but they remember how things made them feel.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, we associate places with emotions, people with emotions, behaviors with emotions all the time. And what's interesting is you can, through like commitment and work and growth, you can change the way a place or a behavior makes you feel, like facing that fear and turning that anxiety into something different, um, which is a pretty powerful thing. Um, but yeah, all the time we draw those associations.
you can change the way how a place makes you feel.
Well, I can use an example. So, like, going to my first training session with the team I play for in London at this secondary school that we train at. Like, first time going there, it was a source of anxiety, massive anxiety, and then, I didn't really enjoy going to those sessions for a couple of months because it was just, I don't know, I felt like I had something to prove, or I didn't know these people, so it was a bit terrifying. Then by the beginning of this season, where I was much more established in the squad, that place became associated with different emotions of excitement, of happiness, of enthusiasm. It was no longer a source of anxiety, I guess. So maybe there's something
So
to that too.
kind of overcoming the fear.
Yeah, exactly. And we don't have to be. I guess a point we can draw from that is we don't have to be a victim to our conditioning. You
We can
can.
break it.
Yeah, you can break it. You can create new patterns for yourself. It just takes courage.
Yeah, because there's a lot of people that are like have trauma from like little things that happen in childhood, and therefore like is the best solution for them. Like, well, we don't want to generalize, but a good solution for trauma is to overcome the fear so that it doesn't like overcoming fear can actually do like a madness. Like it can do a lot of things to a person. Um,
Yeah, I mean, it can make you more brave in those situations, but that then extrapolates to you see greater bravery in yourself, and that helps with your self-esteem and stuff. I mean, I think a lot of people are, someone may be afraid of public speaking because they did a bit of public speaking as a kid in primary school and got laughed at or whatever. And that fear remains there. It's like that memory traps them away from that behavior. But exposing themselves to that as an adult and overcoming it, that can be a really like revitalizing and transformative process. Um, Facing your fear is a beautiful thing to do, man. It's terrifying, but it's alive. It's that turning chaotic energy into an adventure, into skill development, into growth, into mastery. That's what being a human being is.
and what we're coming to is kind of like, so we're always like we're all conditioned to things like to a certain extent. Like we're conditioned to expect that when I go to the coffee shop that the outcome is going to look like this way.
Right.
And it's not until you like break that conditioning that you kind of realize that like the world doesn't actually revolve around this. It's kind of like conditioning is kind of like our perception of reality.
Mm.
It's kind of like where the limits are, and it's
Yeah.
and I think seeking to break your conditioning is not easy, but I think it's a part of growing as a human. Um, these kind of bubbles that you're put in, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. You have a niche, and there's something like to that, knowing what your niche is, knowing where you're happy, where you should be dwelling. I mean, for me, for example, like a basketball court or a gym is a very happy place. I have very happy associations with that. Whereas going to a house party or a rave or a nightclub to me is like very uncomfortable. But to somebody else, the inverse may be true.
Mm.
And so is it right for me to dip my toe into places where I'm uncomfortable? Yeah, maybe. I'll learn something about myself for sure. Um, but it's like knowing what your niche is, but also be willing to expand it occasionally and see and push your fear. I saw a quote the other morning. I think I saved it actually, if I can find it on my photos, um, from good old Dostoyevsky. And he said something like, I can't see the photo; it's not saved to my laptop. But something like, "Man has everything in his hands, but it all slips through his fingers for a lack of courage. You know,
Cool.
you have the potential to be anything you want, but you just let it slip through your fingers because of fear.
Mm,
Yeah, it's so true, man. I think courage and humility might be the two character traits where if you get them, you've won. Nothing can
mm,
stop you then. Because courage stops the world and external factors from stopping you, and humility stops yourself from getting in your own way and your own ego. Like you can contend with world and self if you have courage and
um,
humility.
it reminds me of a couple quotes that I've read from the Gospel of Thomas recently about how we already have these things. And one of them is that Jesus said the angels and the prophets will come and give you those things that you already have. And you too give those things which you have and say to yourself, when will they come and take what is theirs? So I just really like that concept about like you already have it. And the second one is, why do you wash outside the cup? Do you not realize that he who made the inside is the same one who made the outside? Which to me kind of means this this inside this internal this inside the cup has basically the ability to change outside. Like there's a big theme about that in the gospel about we already have these things. If we want to do something, if we want to be courageous, and it's about like recognizing that it's actually inside us and just bringing it out. Yeah.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I like it, man. These are valuable lessons. You know, these are things we should be taught this stuff in school. You know, this should be what we should be taught about life. But anyway, I'm happy to call it a day there if you are.
Yeah. Let's call it there. Thanks everyone for listening. I think this is episode 138. Um, so yeah, thanks guys for joining us.